This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire by Chris Kempshall is out today. In your feed, there's already a spoiler-free review of the book. And now, in this episode, is my interview with Chris. It was so good. That's all I'm going to say about it. I'm just going to say it was good and you'll have to believe me. And then you can keep listening to us talk about how he tricked all of us. It's not fair, but I'm not mad about it. Enjoy. We were just talking about before I started recording how you were one of my very early guests, and since then we've both done many cool, exciting things, including you writing an official Star Wars book, which, you know, the other one that you wrote that we talked about, fantastic. This one also fantastic, and we're going to talk about that. It's just you did it. And we are talking on the day that it comes out. So instead of asking you how it feels for a book almost to be coming out, I can say, hey, your book is out. How does that feel?
It's odd because it's been a part of my life for a surprisingly long time, and it feels very odd over the last few months to have had it moving away from simply being mine to not being mine anymore. It's everybody else's. It belongs to everybody else, which is fine, but it's a very odd thing for something that's kind of been in your life to varying extents for 2 years or so, maybe. Probably time-wise, it's probably something like that. But it's exciting because you spend a lot of time writing the thing and hoping that people like it and that they get it. That was the big thing for me. I wanted people to get it. And then you send it out into the world and you sit there and you hope. And then it's release day for America today, and my notifications are full of people who are excited, and there are people in the UK who've already read it and they got it, which feels like a good sign. So it's exciting, but it's a lot. The last week has been a lot. And you're the first interview that I've done. I'm doing, like, now that the book exists and we can properly talk about it, which is super cool. But it's also like you get me at the fresh end. Like, come back to me in like 3 weeks' time when I'm like a tired husk of a human, and we'll see.
I'm pretty sure this also happened last time.
Yeah,
I was
100%.
like, it was
you were
very
the first
early.
person.
Yeah. I don't know how this keeps happening, but here we are.
You're doing very well to keep booking me in early.
Yeah. I remember when we first heard about this book, I was like, first of all, I was like, no way he did it. He's writing a Star Wars. And then I was like, we're getting another in-universe history, which I just need an entire shelf full of these. Like, I don't care what it's about. I can't say I particularly was interested in, the Empire from like a, from this perspective. But then I read the book and I was like, well, give me anything. Give me an entire book about battle droids. I don't care. This is what I want. This is what the people want. I can't believe you got to do this, but you did.
I did,
You did.
which is weird and wonderful and exciting, and everything about it has made me very happy.
Mm.
And hopefully, if this is if the people do demand it, if they could stand up and demand it repeatedly in a volume, maybe we'll all get to do more of these.
Yes, I hope so. Um, so you are a historian in real life.
I am.
Um, and you've written a Star Wars book that is an inter-universe history of one particular segment of the larger Star Wars story in the universe. Did you ever think that you'd be able to apply your expertise from your actual work in the real world to doing something like this? Because that's like it's kind of like a dream come true.
I mean, it 100% is a dream come true. So, I mean, the easy answer to that is no. Everything that's led me here was the act of like wild good fortune. In August 2020, during the pandemic, I was doing research for my other book that we talked about, the academic one.
Mm.
Um, and I put something out onto the internet about using the British Library in between lockdowns in 2020, and saying basically, if you're a historian, you need to go to the British Library. It's fine. There's people are masking, there's hand gel, all the things that we did in 2020.
Mm.
And somebody at the British Library kind of tweeted that out and mentioned that I was working on a thing about Star Wars, and DK Books saw that tweet and contacted me to ask me if I'd like to help them write Star Wars Battles That Changed the Galaxy, which was another kind of in-universe history
Mm.
book. Um, and then from that, I got the opportunity to pitch this idea to the editor at DK, and for then to work its way up through Lucasfilm. So no, none of that is plausible as an outcome. None of
Yep.
that makes any sense. None of that, you couldn't plan for it. There's no roadmap to doing that. So no, I never expected that this would come. I wanted it. I wanted to write Star Wars books. I've wanted to write Star Wars books for like 25 years, at least. When the computer game Star Wars Galaxies came out, I spent a lot of time writing fan fiction
Mm.
because I loved it and it was
Yeah.
great, and I loved the universe, and that's what I wanted to write about. But this, me being here now talking to you about this book that I've just written, it was never on the cards. It was never going to happen.
Mm.
So to have it happen is wonderful. And it makes me very, very happy. I mean, I occasionally feel like a prang of guilt because I see people who are kind of doing creative stuff in the fandom, and have done for years, far more than I've been doing creative stuff like this. And sometimes I'll ask, how do you do it? How do you get to do this thing? Like, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know how you get to do this thing. You get incredibly wildly lucky.
Yeah.
Is my experience, and I don't know how you can replicate that thing.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that sometimes you get really lucky, and
Mm.
it's wonderful if you do.
Yeah. In all the authors I've gotten to talk to, I found that for probably most of them, they never thought it was going to happen. They weren't necessarily trying actively to
No.
make it happen, and it kind of just happened. And their advice is always just, keep doing whatever it is you're doing, because sometimes it works out, and never in the way you think it's going to. But
Yes. And also, when I was writing fan fiction, the dream was, oh, and suddenly Del Rey email me in like 2004 and asked me to write a book, that I'm still waiting for that email. But at the same time, I enjoyed writing fan fiction. So therefore, it's entirely fine to do it just on that level, to do something that you enjoy. And if something more comes from it, then great. But if not, then you still got to do something that you enjoyed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's probably my kind of look back on 20 years ago, Chris, with doing something that he enjoyed, and it turned out that 20 years later it put him in sort of good stead for doing this.
There you go. All right, so let's talk about the Empire specifically, because that is, in fact, what the book is about. You could probably tell based on the title. What is it about the Empire that really interests you in a way or enough that you were like, I'm gonna write an entire, like, very long, amazing, insightful, life-changing book about it?
So, I mean, I find the Empire interesting anyway.
Yeah.
I always, I always have. When I've played like X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, I liked playing the Imperials. When I played strategy games, I liked playing the Imperials. When I was played Star Wars Galaxies, I played an Imperial character, which, with the acknowledgement of like the Empire is horrendous,
Yeah.
but there's something, there's something interesting about it on that level. But also, what I find interesting about, or found interesting about the Empire, is so much of what we know about the Empire we don't know.
Hmm.
It's all based on assumptions of, well, this is how the Empire would have to operate if it was to produce the Death Star. They must be doing massive industrial expansion. They must be dragging resources out of somewhere, a battle station the size of a moon. But there's loads of stuff in it that we've never actually seen. It's never actually been covered. It's always just been kind of implied or accepted or kind of assumed that this must be what the Empire does to be the Empire,
Hmm.
which left like a huge amount of room to go, well, okay, but what does that actually look like? How would this function? How would all of these things tie together? And what would happen if we take like the tiny little mentions of stuff that's dotted across, comics, or comes up in a computer game somewhere, or is, a passing line in something? I go, well, actually, what if we start trying to tie these together to make something cohesive, to make something rounded that shows you how this system functions, how it operates. And then you take the next step of that of, okay, if this is how it functions and this is how it operates, what does that mean for people who live inside the Empire or who work in Imperial service? What does it mean before the Death Star becomes a power? And what does it mean after the Death Star becomes a power? And what does it mean after the Empire falls? What's the experiences of these people within the Empire? What does it feel like? It's in many ways, this is a book about what it feels like
Hmm.
to look at the Empire, and to really really look at it, strip it all away and go, well, what is this thing that has dominated Star Wars as a franchise for decades and decades and decades, and all roads within Star Wars canon kind of lead to the Empire. So that's what I found interesting. This gargantuan thing that sits at the middle of everything, that has enormous gaps in it, and they're gaps in our understanding. Characters in the galaxy must understand how this works. It hasn't come up yet. We haven't had the chance to see it through their eyes. So I found that really interesting and kind of like a tempting, ambitious thing to kind of take a swing at.
Yeah. And you did a really, really amazing job with it.
Thank you.
It is one of those things, like, if you are thinking about reading it and you're like, but I don't know if I want to know all this about the Empire. Like, you absolutely want to know. um you want to know, you do, I promise.
I mean, I certainly hope so. That the way that we worked on it and we pitched it, it's not a book. So I saw a lot of people kind of like, oh, I really hope we get into like the imperial tax system, which, the imperial tax system comes up in the book, but it's not
Yeah.
going to be like, and here's a bunch of spreadsheets and various tax code numbers, because that's not stimulating to me as a writer, and I can't imagine it's stimulating to a reader. It's about what it means.
Yeah.
It's not just the stuff. It's about what is the reality of this thing if it exists.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very much a a book about not just the Empire itself, but its impact on everything, including everyone that lived through it or didn't.
Yeah.
um it may not be what people are expecting, but, like, in a good way. That's kind of how I'm framing it, is like, just give it a go. And it is long, but, like, don't let that intimidate you, I'm gonna say, because it's worth it.
So I think the thing you said in there, like, it's not necessarily what people expect. the reality of the book, which I think, I can say to you and you can understand now, was probably one of the most closely guarded secrets when the book was announced, that we were able to camouflage ourselves by calling it a history book. And it is a history book.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily what it is.
Yeah.
But by that, it meant that people approach it and they get the experience out of it that I wanted them to get out of it, which they wouldn't get if we'd have flagged up what this is in advance.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, I started reading the introduction and I immediately was like, this is something else, in a good way, because I was like, oh, like immediately I was like, oh, I get what's happening here. And I can't wait for other people to read it and start talking about it, because it is, I'm trying to say things without spoiling things
Yeah,
for
it's
people.
really hard.
It's hard. It's hard. I really am gonna say just go into it prepared to have a great time. And I mentioned the length of this book, and it can seem intimidating. It's not. I started reading it and I honestly read it pretty fast because I was just into it. You mentioned that this question. You mentioned that this ended up being longer than your dissertation. And I had to ask this question, knowing from secondhand experience what writing a dissertation is like. How was writing this book similar or different from the other very long thing that you've written?
Yeah. So I mean, so to put this into perspective for people, the contract for the book was 90,000 words. And I missed that target by 30,000 words.
Oh.
And it came in at about 120,000 words. But that was fine because the way that the book worked, there was never an upper level, which is, a really dangerous thing to tell a historian, that there's no actual limit. It's just basically like the limit of human endurance. And so there's two aspects to this question. One of which is like the actual writing process, which really kicked into gear back end of spring, summer, or beginning of summer last year. And it was basically, so every chapter is around about 4,000 words. And we were looking at sending off blocks of 5 chapters every month. So you're talking 24,000 words every month, then 24,000 words the next month, then 24,000 words the next month. Your viewers won't be able to see, but the fact that I'm holding up a wrist in a wrist brace at the moment might indicate how that panned out towards the end, or kind of more recently. But so that aspect was, it got quite grueling, not because I wasn't enjoying it, but like 24,000 words is a lot of words every month, when on top of like your job.
Yes.
And the research process was really, really interesting and super collaborative. And one of the things that I wouldn't accept this in academia. So I don't want this to be the vision of the book now. That just because my name is on the book does not mean that I'm the only person who worked on the book. There's a huge number of people that I'm incredibly grateful for, who, at Lucasfilm and at DK and Story Group at Lucasfilm, who were getting, every single month when I sent off a bunch of chapters, we're getting like a list of questions for chapters coming down the highway towards me that I had to start writing, because we wanted to do a good job of it. And if I was to say treat this like an ordinary history book, so yeah, I'm in my mild-mannered civilian life, I'm a First World War historian. So say I wanted to write a book about the First World War, there'd be big battles in it that you would expect to see in the book, like the Battle of the Somme or the Battle of Verdun or something like that. But that's not enough for a book. There are other battles, there are other things going on, and you need to include them in some way, shape, or form to kind of create the cohesive narrative and to show what the author of the book thinks is important. But to get that information, Story Group were having to drag stuff out that had been like a passing reference to like a battle, but the battle had never necessarily been sketched out with any details in it. So then, well, can I fill in the details? What can, who's around at this point in time? What can we start dragging in? So trying to construct that was no mean undertaking, and a lot of the legwork for that wasn't being done by me because I was sending these questions up the line and then waiting for information to come back down about, what I would be able to talk about, what was going to be, what they had information about, and the like. And then you also have all of these gaps that we would like to fill. There's stuff that we've assumed exists, but then, does it exist? Has it ever come up anywhere? We don't want to produce something and find out that, like, a comic at some point contradicted this. The book is designed to deal with those contradictions, and it's built into the process that actually it's fine if there are contradicting sources. That's part of the setup. But it was a really interesting kind of collaborative process, and it was one of the reasons I think why Lucasfilm were fine. So in September last year, I went to a First World War conference in Canada. Had a great time because I'm a First World War historian and doing that. And then I disappeared at the end of that conference. And it was, there's nothing on like social media or anything like that to explain that I wasn't in Canada anymore, because I went to San Francisco and I went to Lucasfilm and we sat down and we kind of planned out large parts of key stuff in the book over an hour or so worth of conversations. And that was, I think, Lucasfilm, because they were aware of how this constructing this book was and how it was going to be, that actually sitting down in a room and being able to go, this is what I'm thinking and what I'd like to do. We could do this over email over the course of about 3 weeks, or we can try and structure some of this now, and then I'll send you what I think we have, and then we can work with something real. So, this book doesn't exist at all, and certainly not in any recognizable form, without that collaborative research help that was going on. There are a lot of people who don't get their name on the front of the book that the book doesn't exist without.
Yeah. I mean, doing books like this, doing writing in general, like from the outside, you think, oh, you're just writing a book, it's just you. But like, especially in publishing, it's not just you. There's
No.
always a whole team of people doing, what they do for this one part of the book. And it's so good when when authors acknowledge that it wasn't just them, it was everyone, because it is like, I love the team effort that goes into books like this. It just
Yeah.
fascinates me that like, um, this book started out as an idea that you pitched, and it came together because everyone was like, okay, let's do this. Here's what we're doing. Let's sit down and figure this out.
Yeah.
I love that.
Because I can't sit here with like a straight face or anything produce, resembling human shame and go, oh no, yeah, I'm just a genius. That's why my name's on the book, and I did all of these things, and I worked the printing presses as well, because apparently it just isn't true.
Yeah. Um, I can't imagine that you want to think about this right now. Because you underwent so much work, and now you're going through the whole process of promoting that thing, which is
Yeah.
also a lot. But I am going to ask you anyway.
No, please do, please do. I understand.
If you had an opportunity to write another book like this, is there a topic? It's not the Empire, because you've done that already.
Yeah, yeah,
Is there a
we've been there, done
topic
that.
that you would dive at the chance to be like, yes, I will do another one. It will be just as long. Let's go.
So I mean, there were a few ideas ticking around in the back of my head that I'm going to sit on for a little while and
Mm.
let them percolate a little bit. But first, I completely understand the question, and it's a question that has been coming up on like Twitter quite a lot recently. It's like, oh, it's a fantastic. What are you going to do next? Like, come on, guys. I literally broke myself writing this one,
No.
but I the it's an interesting question because of the way that I conceive of
Mm.
this book. Because the obvious thing is go, oh, it's a book about the Empire. You could move on to another time period, and it's true, it is a book about the Empire. But the interesting thing for me about the historian is, the author of this book in universe and the time period that this book comes out. That's the interesting thing for me, because
Mm.
that's the interesting thing for me about history books. You know, which historian has written this book about the First World War? When did this historian about the First World War publish this book? That's what I find super interesting, because history and science fiction are often about kind of particular moments and particular times. So the question for me isn't necessarily, you know, what time period do you want to do next? It's who do you want to write the next, or who would you want to write the next Star Wars book, and when would you want the next Star Wars history book to come out in? And I don't necessarily have an answer to that yet, because, you know, we could say, you know what, I'm going to do a book about the Rebel Alliance, but a book about the Rebel Alliance when? Like, after immediately after Yavin, during Andor, after The Empire Strikes Back, after Return of the Jedi, before The Force Awakens. And the answers to those questions change what the book is. So I don't have a moment yet in my head, and part of it'll be, you know, about how this book lands and how people, like, you know, people seem to be enjoying it, which is amazing and super exciting for me. And hopefully that maintains. But it'll be interesting to see, once people read it and you know, the extent to which they get it, and what this book is will impact my thought process, probably, about what next might be an interesting thing to do. But equally, you know, my book exists because I've been referring to it as the Baver precedent, because of Kristen Baver's Skywalker Family at War set a precedent. So, you know, maybe somebody is working on a pitch now or a book now, and I just don't know about it, based on the fact that my book has existed, and they'll come out and there'll be a different history book written by somebody else, which would be super interesting, because, you know, I worry about, you know, just reproducing my voice. It's not my voice, but, you know, if I keep writing history books, then it's me keeps writing history books. You know, it could be super exciting for somebody else to write a history book, that I would eat up, and then maybe that'll inform an idea for me further down the line. So I don't have anything yet, but I do have a few ideas of stuff that I think would be fun. So we'll see what comes from any of those when I get a chance to sit down. Once the dust has settled on this one, I imagine me and DK and maybe Lucasfilm will sit down and compare notes.
That was a great way to answer that question.
Thank you.
It was perfect. Congratulations.
Thank you
on this.
Well, thank you for your lovely review of it as well. It was a very touching, moving review, which I appreciated.
Yeah, I wrote it Sunday morning, and I was just sitting here and I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write it. And I cried, and I was like, this is not what I was expecting to happen. But that is the beauty of it, is it might touch you in a way that you're not ready for, and maybe that's a good thing. Yeah. Thank you so much.
I'll pass it on to Bone Kin. He'll be my companion writing it. I'll let him know.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming back and talking to me about this book, and you know, helping me talk about it without spoiling things, which is a very hard thing to do. You'll understand when you read it.
It's not easy.
I hope that everyone does go read it and talk about how great it is, so that there can be more books like this, because that's how it happens.
That is how it happens.
Yes.
If you read the book and you enjoy it, talk about it. You know, review it on Goodreads or Amazon or somewhere like that. Let people know, because, you know, if you just sit there and read it and you love it, and that's all your interaction, then as an author, job done, as far as I'm concerned. I wrote a book, and if you enjoyed the book, then I'm happy. But if you want there to be more books, either by me or other people, then that information can't exist just inside your head. You have to find a way of spreading it across the world.
Yeah. Even if it's just a tweet. I mean,
you might think, just a tweet.
Yeah, you might think it's not going to reach anyone, but this whole thing is a perfect example. You never know who's going to see reading what you post.
Yep.
So there you go.
Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Mondum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on Substack and Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. There are so many ways you can support the show, and all of those ways are linked in the show description. The newest way is to become a member of our Patreon. For $1 a month, you can get access to an exclusive show and a sticker. And if we get 500 people to support the Patreon per month, I can hire an editor. That would be great for me, and maybe for you too. So if you'd like to support the show with just $1 a month, you can do it that way. Or you can just keep listening and sharing the episodes. That is also helpful, and I appreciate it. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.